Good morning and welcome to Invest Precision Medicine. I'm Stephanie Baum, Director of Special Projects with MedCity News. Thank you for joining us for the panel discussion, Software Supporting Biopharma R&D, sponsored by Komodo Health. There's a lot of activity in the area of software companies focusing on drug development, whether the applications are aimed at supporting cell and gene therapies or other types of treatments. This panel will explore some of the different approaches companies are taking towards using software to make drug development more efficient, particularly in the context of clinical trials, the use of real-world evidence, electronic clinical outcomes assessment, and decentralizing clinical trials. And now let's introduce the panel. Moderating the panel discussion today is John Reites, the president of Thread Research, the CEO of Thread Research. An executive entrepreneur turned digital health entrepreneur, John's career includes more than 17 years leading global drug development and healthcare innovation. As president of Thread, he leads the organization to enable customers to launch, adopt, and scale virtual visits and electronic clinical outcome assessments for their decentralized studies. Named one of the top influencers in digital health, John provides expertise and execution experience in digital health strategy, remote patient research, virtual clinical trials, phase 1 through 4 clinical research, patient-reported outcomes, patient engagement, and mobile health. Welcome to the panel, John. Also on the panel, we have Dr. Aswin Chandrakantan, Chief Medical Officer and Head of Life Sciences with Komodo Health. Prior to Komodo Health, he was a senior leader in Google's global operations and strategy, which was responsible for the implementation and support for Google's 240+ ad products, sustaining $110 billion annually in revenue. He also brings in-depth healthcare and analytics experience from his role as an engagement manager at McKinsey. There, he was a founding member of McKinsey's healthcare analytics service line, supporting leading biopharma companies, payer reform in over 12 states, and revenue cycle management at top integrated delivery networks. He also led strategic initiatives for polio eradication strategies for Nigeria. Welcome to the panel, Aswin. And we also have on our panel Annie Harris, Director of Technology Enablement with Covance by LabCorp. Annie has over 28 years of experience in the development and support of clinical operations, project management, reporting and analysis of clinical trial activities. She leads the team that support various applications for the company, ranging from study startup, setup, user access provisioning, clinical trial management, systems, data mapping for electronic data capture, IVR, lab data, reporting, and global process workflows across applications. In addition, she is responsible for leading requirement gathering for system upgrades and integrations efforts in outside systems. Annie is a founding member, former secretary, and current director of IT for Women of Color in Pharma, a nonprofit informal network of women committed to providing an environment that nurtures and empowers women of color employed in the pharmaceutical industry. Welcome to the panel, Annie. And with that, I turn it over to you, John.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Hey, and 2 brownie points for reading our bios in full length. That's an accomplishment. So thank you for that. Annie, Aswin, great to talk to you today. Thanks for spending some time on the panel. And again, as Stephanie mentioned, this whole topic of how is software impacting and being used in biopharma is an important one. There's a lot of different directions we can take today. And so we're going to really focus the conversation on the key topics that Stephanie mentioned at the beginning. And so maybe just to kind of open us up, really what I like to do beyond the bios, Annie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and these research and development market shifts that your organization is experiencing today?
Yes. Hi, John. So I've been with Covance for 28 years. Just in May, it was 28, and I have seen a lot of different changes in the industry. So I started even before there was EDC. So seeing the shift now in what we are seeing in the clinical trial management area is just making sure that everything is virtual, making sure that everything is patient-centric. So focusing on decentralization, the decentralized trials, telehealth, all of that is the main focus now in the industry. Not having trip reports being created by the monitor going out to the sites. Let's think of more quicker ways to do everything and to be patient focused.
Yeah, that's perfect. Aswin, over to you.
Hi, my name is Aswin. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Komodo Health, and we're a healthcare analytics company. The three mega changes that we're seeing are, first, as Annie's already alluded to, the focus around decentralization. I think a lot of that was in some sense aided by COVID, which kind of pushed the acceleration towards that trend. The second piece is, I feel like most of the indications in the industry are rarer disease in some sense, which is like 20 years ago, you're looking for a breast cancer patient. Now you're looking for a metastatic, triple receptor negative breast cancer patient that has failed 2 lines of therapy and does not have renal and hepatic insufficiency. And I think what it takes in order to support trials, run trials, find eligible patients, I think is massively different in those scenarios. And the third piece is, I think there's a large macro trend around diversity and inclusion, making sure that underrepresented populations or subsampled populations are included to make sure that all the therapeutic modalities that are created and being pushed out into the patient landscape address the disease burden across all populations and not just specific overrepresented populations. So.
Yeah, that's great, Aswin. Yeah, and just for so John Reites, we heard a little bit of my background, but I think about this whole world we're talking about, how impacting software, impacting R&D has been around for a long time. I joke with people that I run a company that's been focused on decentralizing studies. I ran my first ones back when you had to write the protocol, build the tech yourself, and things like e-consent and telehealth didn't exist. We created them, right? It was a bunch of us nerds in a room making them happen and building those iterations. And then we published them back in 2010 and 2011, 2012 and say, this is the future. And fast forward, it's 2021 and we're just now getting to it. So I kind of joke with a lot of friends that I feel like a music band that just got signed. We've been touring for 15 years. You just heard the record and now it's kind of getting steam. And I agree with what you're both saying. I feel like it's been a really interesting time. And the pandemic, I think from our perspective, just accelerated people's mindset. The work was already there. It was already regulatory compliant. It was already validated. It was actually already growing and happening. I think it shifted us because this, and we have moments in history where people have to make a change. They have to be faster. They're required to make it. It's amazing what our industry can do. Like, look at the vaccines, look at what we've been able to do to save visits. And so I think, when I look at these market shifts, yes, I agree. But what I would kind of add is, we look at it as we've got, sites and researchers and patients looking for one technology to do things, not 15. Right. That's, because everybody else has consolidated omni-channel experiences in every other vertical. And in life sciences, we're one of the last ones to do that. We've got work to do. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that today. But second is this idea to be more inclusive, right, which includes diversity. And we're going to talk about some of those topics today as well. But actually using technology to help make sure that our studies and research looks more like the people that actually will benefit from the drugs when they ultimately get on the market. And I think the third thing we always talk about, and it's really where this intersection of science, technology, and art, we kind of talk about that fold, can really help us to drive more efficiency. We all know this thing we all are passionate about in R&D pharma, right? And doing clinical trials is still, I don't know if you, like me, you explain this to your friends, like how monitoring works, and they go, so you have a person enter data and then someone flies to review the data. And we all know that we've got changes to make. But we have to be considerate that we're an industry that puts experimental medications in people's bodies. We're not building gamification apps. And so it takes time to do that right and be conscious about that change we make. So excited to chat with the both of you about these topics today. Let's get right into discussion. Just a couple of questions for you. Annie, if I could start with you, I would love to just know, when you look at sort of this software market and what solutions are available, what are the 1 to 2 most significant shifts in software that you're seeing that can impact biopharma and research?
Well, I think just the industry in the whole, Zoom, for one thing, helps, but also with telehealth, to be able as a participant in a clinical trial, to be able to have the visits, you can dial in and speak to your doctor. You can, you don't have to go into the office. Just that simplicity of doing that will make compliance so much better. And thank God that we had already started that type of activity in the industry to be able to then be utilized during COVID. It was a win-win that we did have telehealth in place and that the entire country was moving towards not having to be face-to-face. It truly saved us as a country, as as a world, to be able to have that capability. So I think it's just going. I do think a lot of subjects probably will not want to go back to going into the doctor's office. Why? It's sort of like giving a child a piece of candy. Once you've done it and it works well, why do I have to go back to doing it the old way? Ordering food. Why do I have to go into the grocery store now, right? Why do I have to go and actually pick up my drugs, my prescriptions from the pharmacy? Have it mailed to me. So mailing in your pharmacy, your prescriptions, at home mailing is great. Covance is a part of LabCorp, so we also have seen the shift as well with the at-home kits. You can go and pick up the kits. So it has all of that shift towards patient-centric activity without contact has been revolutionary. And I think the industry is going to continue in that way, even without a pandemic.
Yeah, just to add in, I think the other piece that's revolutionizing where we as an industry stand is around the liquidity, availability, and the insights around data. So every single time a patient interacts with the healthcare system, there's a data artifact that's generated from that. And what I find oftentimes frustrating is well, why don't we ever learn from the journeys of the past? Why aren't all patients benefiting from the fact that there's been hundreds of millions of patients that are in their shoes over the last 20 years? And so that's where I think companies like Komodo Health, we're focused on, can we find screening eligible patients in near real time and the providers and institutions where they seek care, so that you can have that conversation with the provider around, hey, there's a patient that might be eligible for therapy. And this is a national view. So it's not just okay, well, let's go to the big oncology specialty hospitals. What if these patients are out in the community? What about the patients that don't make it through the care system but are potentially eligible? What about the patients that are that may not, whose provider may have never been or talked to the industry before? How do you drive education and adoption around those providers having access to trials and their underlying patient panel having access as well? So for me, we as an industry need to learn from the journeys of the past in order for us to really bend the trajectory of what we want for patients in the future. And ideally, we're learning from our past journeys to do that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think I'm with you. I think when I look at where these shifts have happened and what we've seen happen in our industry recently, the two that come to mind, and Annie and I are 100% agree on one of them, is on virtual visits. And again, I want to be clear. It's not like my 14-year-old and I can code a telehealth platform this weekend. That's not rocket science. The ability to move validated assessments from a clinic to a home and provide a hybrid opportunity for sites to conduct and participate in DCTs by augmenting how they work is where the magic is. And I'll tell you that what's really interesting for us is, when we started all this 5+ years ago, everything was North American based. Now we're in 52 countries. And when you look at doing this work in Europe and Asia Pac and Africa, there's keen differences in the implementation of these. So I would tell you the big significant software solution sort of move I've seen is the globalization of this work and the nuance in the global sort of operational model around it. Because, as much as we know that technology enablement is much better globally, we're US ranks 18th in tech enablement. Even though I think my Wi-Fi is great, it's actually not as great as Brazil. And the reality is despite that, we still have cultural differences globally that really do matter in how they do virtual visits and who's on the other end. And I think those nuances that really do impact the use of software really come into play. But the big one for me is to Annie's point, I think this ability to hybrid everything, we've all hybrided everything in our lives. And what I'll tell you, in all of our patient insights and site insight work globally, we don't actually see that much difference in global interpretation of hybrid. So even if I take a US approach and I say in the US, I'm going to still go to Target, but I'm going to use the Target app maybe a little more. When you go global, you see consistency in that. You actually see a leverage to more digital, by the way, in Europe and Asia Pac than you see retraction in the US. And so what I find is really interesting is that this kind of shift that we've had in the consumer world is 100% impacting expectations for us in the clinical trial and R&D world. And I think that raises the bar for all of us, right? We did a patient insight work the other day, and Andy, you'll think this is funny. You'd be just knowing that you do this, but we had a patient, we showed them how to do e-consent, e-COA, telehealth. They were basically doing everything on a glass wall, and they were doing everything. And when they got done, we said, what did you think? And they said, isn't this how this always works?
That's great.
And we had to explain to them, well, actually, no, we're all still working on that, but I'm glad you see it that way. And so what I would say is we have work to do, but I think this is a part of it. So, Aswin, when you think about kind of these solutions, how are these solutions making research more efficient? Like, we need to focus on efficiency. Give me a couple examples of how they're driving efficiency.
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity that's untapped for us as an industry around efficiency is really around real world evidence and being able to, for example, power external or synthetic control arms. Let me just kind of give you an example.
Please, yeah.
Going back to Annie's point around patient centricity, like there's no patient that has cancer that wants to be in the control arm of the trial. And look, I'm not arguing that, look, everything should be retrospective and we shouldn't have prospective studies. But you need to be able to tap into the journeys of the past to statistically power the study appropriately. 1. 2, in a place where external control arms or synthetic control arms are appropriate, you want to be able to get patients the experimental drug versus dropping them onto a control. From a life sciences perspective, you look at efficiency, you increase speed, you're decreasing cost because you only need half the patient panel now, and you're also optimizing throughput. And you couple that with data solutions that are really good at finding patients that have rarer diseases, because half of trials essentially fail because of lack of recruitment. And you're essentially you're going to find more dollars against areas that have higher disease burden with more inclusive populations. And it's a win for patients. It's a win for the industry in terms of efficiency. It's a win for us as a society where we can get drugs faster, cheaper, better, and there doesn't need to necessarily be almost like the traditional way of working. Not arguing that this is like you could do a synthetic or external control arm for everything, but we need to learn from the journeys of the past in order to make informed choices from protocol design to recruitment to sample sizes to regulatory submissions in order to make the system more efficient.
Yeah, it's interesting. Annie, any thoughts on efficiency?
I was thinking as Aswin was speaking, it is the industry right now, and just again, I'm going to come back to the availability of medical sensors, the availability of telehealth. It's just going to make the biggest difference in compliance for our patients, for our subjects, rather. Yeah. Being able to go into neighborhoods that would normally not or have issues with getting to the hospital, the older generation, the just poor areas. It is going to help so much, because people will have the ability to easily participate. People are used to using a phone. They're used to being able to use Zoom or use FaceTime. That is going to, it has already revolutionized our industry, and it's just going to continue. I think, again, we are not going to turn back and have the world decide to go in again to doctor's visits. There will be still people that just have to go into Target. They'll just have to go into, I can take myself as an example. I am not going into a grocery store again if I don't have to. I will have everything delivered to me. Why? Right? I can selectively go on Amazon and get things delivered easily. Now, having the option is the key. Now there is that option, and a certain segment of the world is going to take advantage of no face-to-face on anything if it's not necessary. And that in itself is going to change how the entire world operates. So that means that from a clinical standpoint, we have to make sure that our sensors work, that they get even better, right? Sensors with the ability to also dial in and speak to the doctor as well. I think it's just going to get better, and it's going to make efficiencies even that better, because things are you're going to think more. If we focus on thinking from a patient-centric standpoint, we are going to challenge ourselves to make the technology that even better.
I really like what Annie's saying around centricity. One of the pieces that I think we as an industry, like when COVID hit, there's a set of data that we collect for clinical trial participants that we really need in order to meet the protocol. And there's some data that we collect that's may not be needed, right? And we bring them in, we run a battery of tests. Some of them are for that study and some of them are not. And what I really found during COVID that was interesting in R&D is we actually have to rationalize what is the minimum amount that we need in order to maximize the data collection, curation, analysis needed to support the study. And what we found as an industry is we didn't need as much stuff inpatient as Annie just described. We also didn't need nearly as many tests. And most of the stuff that we thought that we needed, we're they're already here anyway, so why not just run all these tests on them? We rationalized that out, and I really liked that thinking around, okay, there's also does over collection have a cost, and does that also impact the patient experience, and does it also disadvantage certain participants in the clinical trial process? And so I feel like there's a lot of introspection that's happening for us in a really positive way.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I think on the efficiency piece, because you guys are spot on. One of the things that we did, because we were looking at efficiency specifically around KPIs for recruitment and retention over 2020. So we actually took all of our DCT data, worked with a partner, and basically had them analyze that plus 1,450 other traditionally designed studies running during 2020. So we had some pre-COVID inflection, post-COVID inflection work. And then we basically measured all the data to show where do you win and lose, right? Where is DCT the same? Where was it better? Where was it worse, right? And because the reality is like everything in this world, when you think about software is not perfect. It's really good when it augments and changes how you do work. And so I'm with you. I'm always cautioned to say that, I think there's a message out there around, software and siteless this and that. We're going to replace all this. And guys, I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm telling you, I've done some of those most siteless, decentralized studies you can do. They're tough, and a lot of them don't make any sense. And then the patients get to the end and go, I really rather have gone to the clinic 2 times and done these virtually. And I think this hybrid opportunity is really important, especially oncology, rare disease, because we all know that it's not just about the visit. It's about how do we capture data around the visit. And what I'll tell you is when we analyze that data, and that report's threadresearch.com, it's available, you can get it for free and take a look at it. What's really interesting about the report is you can actually tell, Aswin, you would get this from a data perspective, you can tell when COVID halted everybody. I don't care what study you had, it went bloop, drop bottom, because everybody paused and went, okay, time out. Even DCT studies, because everybody was dealing with their clinics being closed, not because there was a right or wrong, but what you saw is this resilience model kick in where recruitment, retention, and DCTs went here, and it bottomed out for basically 4 straight months. And so I agree. I think, when we look at the model, the idea is that there is efficiency, but it's efficiency in how you operationalize the use case, not just efficiency because you say there's efficiency, right? And I think that's
most definitely. And I do think that the subjects themselves, for instance, I'll give you an example. My son reminded me that I did not have to get in the car and go and pick up my food from Chipotle.
Ooh, Chipotle. That sounds good.
Right?
Let's do that today. That sounds good. Keep going.
I think where patients are concerned, because it is a focus of patient-centric, they are going to realize soon as well, why do I have to actually go to the pharmacy?
Yeah.
Why? Just mail it to me. That is going to trickle and make compliance skyrocket on participating in clinical trials. So it's sort of like when we started with EDC back in the 90s. It took a while, not only for the sites themselves to calm down and realize I can do this electronically, right? Now, the thought of not doing electronic data capture is like, oh my gosh, why aren't you? Of course, it's going to be built into our society, and slowly but surely, I'd say 5 years from now, people are not driving into the pharmacy to pick up anything. It's just mail it to me.
Yeah. Hey, digging into that a little bit too, Annie, talk to me about, because we're hitting efficiency is one part of this, right? And when we think about software and how it's impacting R&D, the other piece is if you do that, you can actually use the model to be more inclusive, right? Inclusive being the broader word. Talk to me a little bit about how you kind of leaning in, and companies that are leaning into the inclusivity can really drive change. Give me a couple thoughts on that, please.
So I think we are just scratching the surface on the inclusivity piece. When you're thinking about making sure that all of the different minority groups are included in protocols, we need to make sure that the thought of how the protocol is written and the expectation of that protocol, that all of that is factored in the beginning. I think we need to have checklists, period, for inclusivity and diversity in our clinical trials, of course. But as a CRO, once we receive those protocols, for instance, there needs to be some standards to ensure that that thought has been included in the protocol, right? And I think it starts there. It's not that it's being not focused on purpose, but let's just make sure that there is a standard in the industry around making sure the diversity and inclusivity is included in the protocols, right? And also how you actually then go out and find the correct patients to meet that criteria. There has to be more of a focus, and just telehealth and making sure that you're in the communities will make all of the difference. How do you even know that there's a clinical trial going on or that you can participate, right? I think how you even position yourself as a company that's wanting to conduct a clinical trial, that I think needs to shift just a little bit as well and become a bit more patient-centric. It's not sit and have the subjects come to you, go out into the community to get said subjects to help with the clinical trial.
I think to add on to that, I've hammered on the data piece, which is when you know the ground truth of where these patients are, it allows you to then target the providers and institutions where those patients are seeking care. I think that's incredibly important. The second piece that I would also say is, I think we need to also look at the way that we kind of manage the processes and the expectations as a sponsor. So just case in point, like we punish high screening failure rates, we punish dropouts. And as a consequence, it's like, well, like I remember some of my, my medical experiences would be like, oh, like this patient might be interesting for this. And they'd be like, yeah, but you know what? Like they have to like change 3 buses in order to get here. And we're really afraid they're not going to show up. So I'm not even offer it. And like, those are the types of like embedded biases as an industry that we just need to be more comfortable. Like we're getting more top of the funnel patients using data-driven approaches. We're not going to punish high screening failure rates. We're not going to punish higher dropout rates. Fundamentally, because we want to aid inclusivity, and that's incredibly important. It's a prerogative of the industry. And the second piece is using data-driven approaches. We can get more patients in the top of the funnel. Like it's like a win-win, right? And so I think one of the pieces that we have to internalize is that, we are over selecting and undersampling specific populations inherent in our processes. And I feel like data can spotlight the problem, so to speak. And then we as an industry, CROs, clinical trial service companies and sponsors have to, and collectively have to revisit some of the assumptions that we've had about what does it mean to be a productive site.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's really good. I think kind of shifting gears a little bit too, this theme of patient centricity, which I hear you. Like it's been so much of a lot of our careers, right? We spent that time. And I think one thing's that, around 4 years ago, we were kind of in that first sort of 30 DCTs mark. And one of the things that was really stuck out for me was the fact that we had spent so much time being really patient centric, but we had not spent a lot of time really engaging with researchers and sites and saying, hey, how can we make your life easier when you do this, right? How do these options and these movements impact your business, right? And so when you think about kind of shifting to the research site end, which are users of all the things you're talking about, can you give me a couple examples of maybe how these software solutions are changing or maybe enhancing their experience, their ability to sort of be involved in a new clinical trial with software?
Yes. So there are portals that are out now where investigators can input their information once. So they may be participating in 5 to 6 different trials, but why do they have to input their same information over and over each time, right? So there is a portal now that's being used. And it's, there's multiple, but there is a portal that's being used where that will help the investigators know that one time I'm inputting my name, I'm inputting my address, I'm inputting all of this information about him. I'm posting my 1572, I'm posting my CV, and it's a one-stop shop. I put it in one time and it can be utilized across various studies that I will participate in. So from the back end systems of making sure that the sites can be more efficient by not repeating everything for all of the 4 to 5 clients and protocols trials that they are participating in, that in itself will help with compliance from the site. Just the burden of not repeating data and keeping up with different passwords. If you have one portal to go in, input that data and utilize it, that's a win-win for compliance for the sites. So although patient-centric focus is important, focusing on the sites and making sure that they are as efficient as possible to help them be compliant on the trials is another avenue that's important. And I do see that shift in the industry as well, which is a good thing because having them taping passwords up around the office is not a good thing, and getting studies mixed up is not a good thing. So making sure that they do have efficiencies and how they utilize software to participate on clinical trials is important. Yeah. And we're moving in the right direction in that way.
That's good.
I think one of the pieces for me that remains, and I think Annie is highlighting a lot of the workflow issues on the research sites themselves. To give you an example, our PRISM software, which is commonly used across sponsors for site selection, recently, we were working with a team in multiple myeloma, and they were like, okay, well, this is our existing site list. These are the investigators that we have as a part of this. When we actually went through and we started doing the analysis of running the patient cohort they were looking for, what they realized was, the PI that they had chosen at that site had 3 patients in a rolling 12-month window, but the person right down the hall had 9. So it's okay, we may have actually over-indexed on the provider that is, always kind of speaking at the podium, but actually not really seeing the treatment flow that's associated with that. And the second piece that was super interesting is that the specific institution was Emory. There was a whole set of, there's about 20 patients in the Emory system itself, of which only 2 had been screened. And so within the existing site footprint, in the place that you've already built like a contractual like obligation, you actually weren't fully capitalizing and bringing this life-saving therapy or experimental therapy to patients that are perhaps eligible for the trial. And so that was very illuminating. And the last piece is, within a 50-mile radius, there was an additional 25 patients that were surrounding the Emory system that were potentially trial eligible. So I think we need to start moving away of like over-indexing on this is the PI and this is the PI that everybody works with. And we need to work with this PI to thinking about like the distribution of disease burden. And so it helps you inform which sites should you be working with. And even when you're working with those sites, how do you think about, you know, the disease burden, and how do you tap into the patient population that's in that site completely? And then also, how do you offer these therapies to patients that might be caught or blinded to, because they're outside of the Emory system, and now, you know, unfortunately, nobody ever talks to them about the trial. And so I think that this is where like data meets, you know, demand, so to speak, and we can bring that together to create a more efficient, patient-centric, and I would say also reduce disease burden focused system through the use of data and software.
Hey, Aswin, kind of lean into that. That's a great example, because I'll tell you, you know, this with data and real world evidence, I think a lot of people, that sounds great. And then they say, so what's the use case? Like, so I use it and I get what? The recruitment use case is great. Thanks for sharing that, because I think that's tangible. It kind of helps show how software is actually can impact design and recruitment. Is there another use case that you see it often at Komodo that you think is a good one that's not sort of design and recruitment related?
Yeah, I think, so I do, let me actually pivot this in a slightly different way. So let's take away the entire data piece. What I really like is, I think there's a lot of patient consented software solutions that are beginning to emerge out in the market, which say that like, look, myself as a patient, I own my data. I want to be able to offer that data holistically and completely to specific institutions, to specific pharma companies that I might be trial eligible for. So it's putting power back in the hands of patients. So I feel like, you know, companies like Picnic Health, and there's companies like Citizen that are doing a lot of that type of like patient consented data work. And what I really like that is that, like, you know, it democratizes the access of data, and it puts power back in the hands of patients so that they can get to life-saving therapies, they can opt into it, they can work on, or they can work with the industry on the therapeutic, you know, journey or the diagnostic kind of odyssey and treatment odyssey that they feel is right for themselves and their families. And so just to take it away from sort of the encounters and kind of what Komodo is doing, I feel like the patient consented data piece is super important, because all too often, like, patients get stuck between like providers, pharma, and payers, and they're like a pawn in the system. And I really like, you know, putting that power back in the hands of the patient.
That's great. Thanks for that. Okay. Well, let's shift gears a little bit, just kind of as we kind of look to the next section. So we've got, I want to do speed round with you. So here's the rules of speed round. Scale of 1 to 10, 1 least impactful, 10 most impactful, and why. I'm going to call out a couple of things for you. Annie, I'll go to you first and then ask them to you second. So just jump in. But what I want to do is throw out a software solution that's in the market, maybe broader, and have you kind of rate it and tell us why you rate it that way. Just so the audience can kind of think about maybe what are more and least impactful today. Let's start with digital recruitment.
Extreme, I can't even say it quick enough. I think it's going to be extremely impactful. It really is. Anything with the word digital in it is definitely going to be very impactful. The quickness, the speed, the decisiveness, the ease of clean data, and how are we going to digitally recruit the people? So I think impactful.
I'm going to give that a 10 as well. For
Yeah.
anything that involves digital for me means democratized, which means that it's definitely hitting patient populations that have been
Yep.
traditionally ignored.
Perfect. ECOA.
You can go first, Aswin.
Digital ECOA. Did that help? No, I'm just kidding. No. ECOA. Jump in. 1 to 10.
So what I would put it probably on a lower rung, maybe around a 3, and only not because I'm digging the progress, but more because I think there's value to standardization. The other piece that I would say is, for example, like with Google, you don't need to organize data in the same way. So a lot of this is around curation and standardization. And I tend to index away from those things because I believe like once you have a Google, you don't need to like assemble like the World Wide Web into like folders or interests, right? And so that's why I give this one a little bit of a lower impact rating.
And lower for me as well, but once everything has the E in front of it, then all of it will be impactful, of course, right? So I see it as a factor of becoming the huge wow, but by itself, it's a small snippet of it.
Yeah, well said. Okay, I'm going to say telehealth, but Annie's made it very clear. If this is not a 10, then we've done something wrong. So
It's a 12.
I think 12, there you go, turned into 11. Aswin, anything you would add to that statement or anything you think?
I'm in very in consensus with Annie.
Fair enough. Okay. This might be a Komodo throw-out question here, but real-world evidence and integrating that data. I already know where you're going to score it, but tell us a little bit why that is a 10.
So actually, if I were to score this on how the industry is using it today, I put it at like a 5. If I were to look at this as once we've actualized the potential of this 5 years from now, I'm gonna put this at like a 15. I believe that this piece represents the largest swing between latent potential and actualized potential on this entire list.
Good. Okay. Andy, over to you. Sensors.
Sorry, the reason I say that is the best trial is one that didn't need to happen and it could actually happen retrospectively. And I know there's folks that would, strongly dissuade me from saying that. The other piece that I would also say is that when you can cut down the number of participants to half in the context of an external control arm, it's more throughput, more speed, more efficiency, and patients that are not randomized to the control arm. I think it's better for everyone.
Interesting. Let's go to sensors next. Annie?
It's definitely going to revolutionize the world. And as I stated earlier, it is going to, the improvement of the sensors are just open for possibilities. We are just scratching the surface of using the medical sensors, right? But to wear the Apple Watch as an example, and you can track all of your steps and all of that, that is just, and then apply that to the medical sensors, that's going to revolutionize us. I think we're not going to truly see how great all of this is until maybe 10, 15 years from now, when everything comes together, the ECOA, all of the other, the e-consents, all of it, including the medical sensors, and being able to get consistent data from your subjects, and and the data can automatically be downloaded to your database to then have your real world evidence for everything to completely connect. 10, 15 years from now, it's going to be golden, I think. But medical sensors, definitely a 10.
Yeah. In terms of future potential, I agree with Annie. This is definitely on the higher end. I think that right now, first, there's 2 angles to why I feel like we as an industry have not really actualized the value here. First is there's a confusion around what are the choices. There's like so many different sensor types and like what do I need to enable my study? And this is where I feel like companies like Electra Labs, now called Human First, like they're kind of revolutionizing and helping to solve that. There's the second piece, which is the sensors actually throw off so much data. It's like, how do you actually mine it for signal? And how do you actually then, like, what do you do with like the aberrations of it, right? Because there's like upside downside, right? Where if you get a thin slice of a patient journey in a particular care setting during a clinical trial versus like you're just monitoring that patient through the entire day for months on end, there's bound to be like so much data that you need to be able to separate signal from noise. And so I think that there's a lot more work to be done there.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's so vast of what the options are so vast of what can be tracked. It is just too much. It's overwhelming. I think the industry probably needs to conform a little bit more and standardize a little bit more. Like, although you can collect 18 to 20 additional points, focus on what it is that you truly need, so you don't overwhelm yourself and have extra data that's not needed. I mean, I think that it's going to take a while for the industry to get focused in standardizing, so you're not overwhelmed with so much data.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. No, thanks for doing speed round. And again, from my perspective, I mean, my company's called Thread. I mean, this is what I've been doing. Like, all this stuff is in one place. It's in one experience or patient site. It's what we do. But I would say on the sensor side, I actually would disagree with you guys on a couple of points. Some of the regs that we contribute to, I got 50 studies with one medical device in them today. There actually is a lot of standardization that's been done. I think the challenge is standardization when you're an Asia Pac looks different than when you're doing a 510K. And so I think the challenge is you are right. For the amount of devices, hundreds of devices we've integrated in our platform, more go out of business than show up to integrate. And I think that's the key point, is the keeping up with it's challenge. But what's interesting is an FEV1 that's a validated endpoint is an FEV1, right? I don't care if your device looks like this or looks like this. It's the experience of taking it. And I do think that you're right. I think the value sensors is actually not about the device. It's about the actual endpoint you capture. And if you use that as replacement value for something else you've had. And if you do that, you got it. If not, it might not be a good solution. It might actually cause more work.
And speaking from a CRO perspective, which of these options do you choose to make sure that you utilize and you want to help your clients select the right sensor or the right approach, because you have to get that data off of the sensor. It needs to be quick. It needs to be controlled, right? And having 15 to 20 different sensors to choose from, it just slows everyone down. It slows everyone down. You can't get the data. You've got, different studies want to use different sensors. It can be very cumbersome. So
agreed.
Yeah, in that case where the industry is concerned, that's what I'm saying. Let's get down to maybe 2 different sensors, and then everyone can quickly get to their data across all of the trials.
Thanks, Ian. It's great. Okay, so we got about 10 minutes left. And like we all thought, I got like 10 other questions I could ask you. We could go on and on about this, but I really appreciate those thoughts and opinions. They're great. So let's go over to questions for the last 10 minutes. I got a couple we got on LinkedIn that some people sent over. I got a few in chat. So one of the questions we had, I'm gonna start kind of bottom go up. Are startup EMR formats that ease patient data entry far from being available to all physicians? So this is, Jai, maybe to kind of lean into your question here, I think what you're trying to ask is, are there like different formats that we can start with? Like, is there an EMR use that makes it easy for entry and moving around? So maybe, Aswin, if I could ask you, could you just give some thoughts on when you think about EMR formats and connectivity, maybe some thoughts on that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, EMR is fundamentally an unstructured data set that's very deep, but it samples a specific setting of care, oftentimes with a specific provider. And so I think the question being asked is, like, is this all a formatting question for us to make it useful? And the answer is no. Like, EMRs are unstructured data sets, and there's certainly workflows that enable providers to be more efficient within the EMR, but it will never rival that of other more structured data sets like labs, genomics, social determinants of health, claims, in which there's just like a standardized, like the 837, 835 is on the medical claims side, it's been around for like 30 years. And like, you will never get to that level of structuring to be able to build like massive insight factories from that. So I would not treat this as like formatting questions. I think fundamentally EMR is about knowing deeply context specific, what does that patient know? Where is that patient in their journey? And why are certain care decisions being made? And it's really strong at that. And you're always going to need to work within the context of an unstructured data set. I don't think that formats or startups really matter.
Interesting. Hey, one other question we got was around biggest barriers to leveraging these large data sets. And again, towards new therapy, existing therapies. So maybe Aswin lean into that, and then Annie, if you don't mind adding anything else that you'd like to, but let's lean into that question, the biggest barriers that you're seeing.
So, I think, go ahead, Aswin. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I would love to hear you.
I think it's structure. I really do think it's structure of collecting the data, making sure that it's collected in a consistent manner. And that's just it. Across the industry, it is not truly consistent. I think that's the biggest barrier.
To add to that, I think the biggest challenge has to do with the lack of a federated backbone or a master. And let me just describe what that means. You can have a de-identified patient master to which you append all these kind of data objects. Oh, this is the EHR, this is the claims, this is the labs, this is the genomics. I think the biggest challenge is oftentimes when you do the Venn diagram of EMR plus claims plus labs plus genomics plus social determinants of health, you basically start with like claims is like a mega ocean, like EMRs are like lakes, and like genomics and labs are oftentimes like ponds. You basically do like at the intersection of all those and you end up with like 5,000 patients. And then it's like, well, is this statistically representative? Is this powered enough for us to be able to work it? And I think that's a very fair question for the FDA to ask, right? And we as an industry need to find a way to be able to combinatorial bring our data together to meet the statistical rigor to prove safety, efficacy, or if we want to use that data in certain ways. And so that's where things shift from right now, real world evidence is almost an internal intelligence engine for a lot of life sciences. But if you really want to prove safety and efficacy and other endpoints using it, we need to get to a place where the data sets combinatorially are large enough to power the endpoints, power the protocols, so that the FDA can do its job of proving safety and efficacy.
Yeah. The only barrier I would add is I think it's all great. These are most of this discussion we just had is the US. And so we're talking about 20% of clinical trials, right? Because only 20% are US recruited. So I think the biggest barrier we have is not that you don't see regulators get behind you, not you don't see, like we see use cases all the time with it. You see it. But I do think that as you go global, different world, you start working with Chi numbers and other integration data sets and access the systems that are centrally controlled. These systems, the sort of the solutions and features in the US are not the same globally. And I think that's, another big barrier we have that companies are working hard to overcome, and we're going to get there. But that's just our current restriction we have is that we have to kind of bifurcate in some ways. Here's your US and here's your rest of world. And I think that's a natural barrier that we have to still lean into it, still do it, but know that it's there.
Yeah, actually what I really like about John, just to add on to what you said, if you think about the way like California almost sets emission regulations in the US, which is like they tell like car manufacturers, this is what you have to do, this is the bar that you need to achieve. And it's like cheaper to just meet that bar and ship it to the entire country. That's where I feel like the US needs to actually play the role of like, we need to set the bar. It needs to be high, and it needs to be something that is generally acceptable to the rest of the world. And so I really like what you said in terms of, yes, we're being very US centric. And I do believe that, we have the opportunity to almost like set the bar and set it high and set the standard for how this work is done.
Yeah, thanks. Well, let's do this. I know we've only got a couple minutes left. We need to be curious of the next session. And so we've spent this whole time talking, and you guys have been awesome. This has been fun. The thing, talking about what are the changes in the industry, what are we actually seeing as the biggest technology impacts today, what are the actual use cases and how that's working. My last question for you is, okay, so knowing all that, knowing how excited we are about these things that are happening and starting to scale now, what are like the 1 to 2 things that you would tell the audience, keep your radar on? Or if you were an investor, this is something I'd be looking at. What are like the next 1 to 2 things that you think could be the next technology innovations in software supporting pharma R&D?
I think go ahead, Aswin. Go ahead.
No. I would love to hear from you.
I just think honestly, what we have on the table now are all of the things we discussed today, and it is just the one software company that's going to be the blockbuster. No one will know, but it will be around improvement around sensors, medical devices. I really do think that's going to be the big win. In what area, not certain, but I think that's going to be the area, enhanced medical sensors.
Yeah. Cool. And just almost echoing that, we oftentimes think that there's something new around the corner. And it's like, if we can actualize the full value of the things we have, everything that Annie described, digital health, things like telehealth, being able to actualize the power of patient journeys over the last couple of decades using data. I think that the technology is here, and I think we're better off looking and trying to use the things that we have and learning from them, because I think there's so much richness there. We just need to kind of be able to take the signal from the noise, rather than trying to get kind of blue sky around, well, what's not here? What's not here is the pull through on all the technologies that we already have.
Yeah, that's well said. I was going to wrap with this. We are totally aligned here. Someone said, what's the next technology I should invest in? I said, depth of use of what we already have.
Yeah.
And I just think that, this is a lot of innovation right here, and we got work to do. Guys, we're at time. We're at an hour. Stephanie, thanks for setting up and getting this together for us. Aswin, Andy, thank you for your time. Thanks for spending an hour today to have this fun conversation. And again, if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out, you can find us all on LinkedIn and you can find our bios. Please reach out, listen to how we can help you and answer questions post. Stephanie, I'll hand right back to you.
Thanks, John. That was a fascinating panel discussion on biopharma R&D software. Thanks also to our panelists, Annie and Aswin. And thank you to our sponsor, Komodo Health. And thank you to the audience for tuning in.